Good afternoon, September 5th. Um, you know, people talk about, being a Christian, Christianity, following God, stuff like that. Um, this is just my perspective and my experience, so how I view it. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but this is just my point of view. Um, when we get into Christianity, following God, okay, um, I was taught that I guess early on in it, it was kind of like a struggle. Um, what to do, what not to do. God's gonna mark that sin against me. It was kind of like a internal battle, with a lot of chaos, like guilt and shame, and oh my gosh, I can't say that, or I can't do that, or whatever. And it's like you gotta kind of put out these little fires all the time. So it was kind of like a unnecessary chaotic going on inside. So I'm like, well, so I kind of I compare that to like swimming in a swimming pool. Um, you know, when I was, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years old, somewhere in there, kindergarten age, I would guess maybe, I'd go for swimming lessons, and you go on the shallow end and you jump in the water, and all the kids, they hang onto the side of the pool and they start kicking their legs, kind of get the feel of the water, feel of the rhythm or whatever. And then after a while, you get hanging on. You get on these little styrofoam foam boards, kick boards, I guess they called, and you put them underneath your chest, and you help them. They help you float. They can lay on them, and you kick, and then you can paddle around. And I hung onto that thing for dear life because, of course, the water was pretty much over my head. So if you let go of that thing, you're going down. And if you let go of that thing, it pops up and flies out, just gets away from you really quick. So you hang on to that thing, and then you feel, I'm going to drown once you let that go. So, you're down at the shallow end and kind of learning how to swim and how to get your bearings and stuff in the water. But then you look down to the deep end, and you see people jumping off the diving boards, and off the high dive, the low dive, and they're cannonball and the flipping, and they dive down, dive off the board, and then they're underwater for probably 30 seconds, whatever. And you're like, they should have came up by now, and then they're like, way far away, like on the other end of the pool or something. They pop up, and I was like, man, how'd they do that, or whatever. And then you got the one guy that's up on the high dive, and he's trying to be, imitate a Olympic swimmer. He bounces perfectly 3 times, and arches his body and does his dive and whatever. I always got the one in the crowd, you know what I mean. So anyway, you're kind of watching that, and you're just like, man, how do they do that? Or stuff like that. So, but then as we grow, physically, and we get older, we learn how to work our hands and work our arms, and we learn how to float and different strokes as far as swim strokes or whatever, and we get more comfortable in the water. Well, it wasn't but like a year or two later, maybe second, third grade, maybe a couple years, whatever, pretty young. I used to go swimming a lot with my cousins, and we'd go into the swimming pool at the high school. Before long, we were jumping off the high dives and low dives and diving head first straight into the deep end, and we'd throw coins down on the bottom on purpose, and we'd dive down 10, 12 feet of water and grab them and come up. It was just like an ability that naturally developed. And so I can kind of take that as like walking with God, to where we first get into the water and like, what's going on? God's gonna, we're frantically hanging onto the edge, and then once we're learning, we grab onto people. We kind of put our faith in them and our trust in them, and do what they do, and hold me up type thing, holding onto the foam board, and then when they slip, boing, that thing slips out of our hand, shoots up out of the water, and then when that person's gone, or whatever reason you separate, yeah, you're kind of like, I'm drowning, what do I do now? So we kind of have to learn our own way of being in the water, your belief in God's faith, or our faith in God, I should say, is like the water. And I'm outside in the cold. It's like 50 degrees. That's why I got a shaky voice. But anyway, we have to develop ways to, to be with God and to develop our faith. And before we know it, if we keep practicing, keep reading the Word and praying, and not be reliant on others, we can be, yes, but not so desperately white knuckling onto somebody. We'll be the ones out on the diving board and jumping in the deep ends, and having a strong faith, and people come to you and they're saying, oh, I got this problem going on. You're like, just keep praying, keep the faith, it'll work out. And they're freaking out, hanging onto the side of the pool, and we're jumping off the diving board like, ooh, we've been there, done that, So I think, well, not I think, but I know that, the stronger or the more we're with God and pray and set aside quiet time and pray and read the Word and stuff like that, that we'll eventually be on the diving boards and just kind of, living like we're supposed to be, So, that's my thought for the day. So keep kicking and keep swimming, and it'll happen. Things will happen. So so there's my thought for the day. I hope you enjoy and get a little encouragement, and we just got to keep practicing, keep the faith, and keep up the good work. Amen. Yeehaw.